The phone buzzed on the table, shattering the quiet stillness of the room. Claire, her heart racing, looked down at the screen. A simple message, seemingly innocent, but carrying a weight so heavy it nearly suffocated her. Her hands shook as she hesitated, staring at the text. In that single moment, her world tilted. The trust she'd built with Alex felt as fragile as glass. Was it a mistake? Was there an explanation? The question gnawed at her as she realized the time had come for confrontation. The truth was out there, and it wasn't something she could ignore any longer. The weight of the phone in her hand felt heavier now. Claire's body trembled with anger and confusion. She had trusted Alex completely, but this betrayal was too much to ignore. Her stomach churned as she tried to make sense of the situation. The message on the screen was just the beginning. The deeper truth was buried somewhere between their conversations, their silent moments, and the life they had built together. But now the veil had been lifted, and she had no choice but to confront it. The hurt she felt was sharp and raw. Claire had loved him, but now all she felt was doubt. Claire felt the silence pressing down on her like a heavy weight. Alex hadn't said anything. His lack of response made everything worse. He didn't even try to explain, to offer any comfort. Instead, he stood there, avoiding her gaze, the shame radiating from him. Her trust in him had been shattered in an instant, but she still couldn't look at him. She needed to hear the truth, but the words felt stuck in her throat. How could he betray her like this? How long had he been hiding this from her? The questions felt endless, and all she wanted was a straight answer. But all she got was silence, and it was suffocating her. The anger in Claire's chest flared again. She couldn't understand how he could be so cold, so detached. His silence felt like a betrayal in itself. Every minute that passed, the realization deepened. He was guilty, and worse, he wasn't even going to admit it. Was she worth it? Claire thought. The thought made her skin crawl. This wasn't just a momentary lapse. This was calculated, intentional. He had hidden it all from her, and that cut deeper than any lie could. The door clicked shut behind Claire with a finality that echoed in her mind. The world outside was vast, but inside, everything had collapsed. She had to leave. There was no coming back from this. Not after everything she had discovered. The pain in her chest was sharp, but the decision was clear. She had to protect herself now, even if it meant walking away. And so she did. One step forward, leaving everything she had believed in behind her. The days following Claire's departure were filled with uncertainty. She couldn't ignore the small things that started to add up. Alex's late nights at work. The lingering phone calls he always seemed to take in private. There was a discomfort now between them, as if they were strangers passing through each other's lives. Claire didn't know if she was being paranoid or if there was more to the story. Her instincts, however, were telling her that something was off. She noticed how he would become distant at times, avoiding her gaze or changing the subject when she asked direct questions. It wasn't just the texts or the silence. It was everything. The little signs she had ignored before now seemed so clear. What made it worse was that Alex never brought up the subject, acting as if nothing had changed, as if they were still living the life they had built together. But Claire wasn't naive anymore. The next morning, Claire tried to push the thoughts away. She had always been someone who liked to believe the best in people, but something was off. Alex was acting like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. He smiled at her like he used to, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gestures were stiff, like he was trying too hard to convince her that nothing was wrong. Claire wasn't sure if he was hiding something, or if it was her own paranoia starting to cloud her judgment. Every conversation felt forced. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was an elephant in the room, an issue they both avoided, but which loomed large. It didn't help that Alex seemed more and more withdrawn, even when they were together. She started doubting her own instincts, wondering if she was just imagining things. The unease grew with each passing day. Claire couldn't help but notice the changes, the late-night phone calls, the secretive glances. Alex's routine had shifted. He was still spending long hours at work, but his phone was always within reach, constantly buzzing. He was distant, and Claire couldn't ignore the sense of dread that clung to her. She had to confront him again, but the idea made her stomach turn. What if she was wrong? What if she was imagining it all? But she couldn't shake the feeling. It was in the way he avoided eye contact or quickly deflected when she asked him about his day. The silence between them had become unbearable. She needed answers, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear them. Each day felt like a slow unraveling of everything they had once shared. Claire's heart raced as she watched Alex slip away further. His reluctance to share details of his day, his constant preoccupation with his phone, these weren't just coincidences anymore. Something was off, and the longer she waited to confront him, the worse it would be. She couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, as Alex was getting ready for another late night at the office, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She waited for him to leave, then she snuck a glance at his phone. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the messages. They weren't just work-related, they were texts from someone else. Someone Claire didn't recognize. The realization hit her like a freight train. The evidence was right in front of her, but the truth felt too painful to accept. She could no longer deny the betrayal. Claire's mind raced, and the adrenaline surged through her body. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She knew she had to confront Alex, but the weight of the evidence made her heart heavy. She stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing what she was going to say. Her reflection stared back at her, unsure and broken. But this was it. There was no turning back now. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. Alex had to face the truth. As she walked toward the door, her steps were heavy with the knowledge of the storm that was about to unfold. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about her own sense of self-worth, her dignity. She couldn't let him destroy that too. Claire couldn't ignore it any longer. The signs were everywhere, each small moment adding more weight to the growing suspicion that something had been happening behind her back. Late-night phone calls, texts that he quickly hid when she entered the room, and the constant, ever-present barrier between them. It all felt like a slow descent into a nightmare, where every piece of her trust was being chipped away. She tried to talk herself out of it, but the evidence had already embedded itself in her mind. She couldn't unsee it. The small lies, the empty excuses, and the moments when he had pulled away from her. All of it was piling up. Claire could feel her world shifting, unraveling bit by bit. She hadn't been wrong before, and this time, the weight of her instincts was undeniable. She had to confront him now, before it all spiraled further into a place she might never come back from. As the days went on, Claire's suspicions only grew. She watched Alex closely, noting how he became more evasive, how he would change the subject when she asked anything remotely personal. His behavior felt colder, more distant. It wasn't just the late nights or the hidden phone calls anymore. It was the absence of warmth between them, a shift that couldn't be ignored. Claire tried to talk to him, but the conversations always felt forced, as though he was a stranger to her now. She felt herself retreating into a shell, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Yet every time she tried to bring it up, Alex would reassure her, dismissing her concerns with a smile and an empty promise that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Something had changed, and Claire couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed the truth, but the fear of what that truth might reveal held her back. Claire couldn't take it anymore. She had tried to push her doubts aside, tried to convince herself that everything was fine, but the cracks in their relationship were too wide to ignore. The smallest things now set her on edge. She noticed how Alex would check his phone in the middle of a conversation, how his eyes would dart nervously whenever she asked him a simple question about his day. The lies were starting to pile up, but what hurt the most was how easily Alex had become accustomed to them. He no longer made an effort to hide his actions or give excuses. Claire felt her heart sink every time he looked at her with those same empty eyes, as though he no longer cared about what they had. It was like she was living with a stranger, someone who had once been her whole world, but was now slipping further away with each passing day. Confrontation was inevitable. Claire couldn't live in this limbo anymore, trapped between doubt and fear. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. One evening, after yet another cryptic phone call, Claire snapped. She confronted Alex in the kitchen, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with years of frustration. He tried to deflect, giving her his usual excuses, but this time, Claire wasn't having it. She needed the truth, the raw, unfiltered honesty. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension. Alex's face softened, a mixture of guilt and sadness flickering in his eyes. But he still didn't offer her the full truth. And Claire realized, in that moment, that the man she had once trusted was lost to her. Claire's heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and yet she wasn't surprised. She had known deep down that this was where it would all lead. Alex's half-truths and lies had been enough to break her trust, but it was the way he tried to justify his actions that hurt the most. He was trying to blame everything on her, as though it was her fault he had gone down this path. Claire could feel the anger bubbling up inside her, but she forced it down. She had to stay calm, had to face the reality that this relationship was over. The betrayal stung, but she knew she couldn't keep holding on to someone who no longer cared. With one last glance at Alex, Claire walked out of the room. The finality of it all hit her in that moment. There was no turning back now. She had to reclaim her life, even if it meant walking away from the person she had once loved. Claire had no idea how long she had been sitting there, staring at the screen, waiting for something, anything to confirm what she already knew. But this time, it was different. The phone in her hand felt like a weapon, and her heart raced as the full weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. Alex had been hiding something more than just an affair. The truth was more tangled, more insidious than she had ever imagined. As Claire scrolled through the texts, the realization hit her hard. The person Alex had been seeing was someone she knew, someone she had trusted. It wasn't just a betrayal of their relationship, it was a betrayal of their friendship. Her best friend, her closest confidant, had been the one Alex turned to. The anger that flooded Claire was overwhelming, but it was the deep sense of hurt that lingered, filling the empty spaces where love and trust had once resided. She wasn't sure she could ever forgive either of them. The anger Claire felt was explosive. She couldn't contain it any longer. How could they do this to her? She had trusted both of them with her whole heart, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. Her thoughts raced, her hands shaking as she dialed her best friend's number. The phone rang, and Claire's breath became shallow, the anticipation of the confrontation building with each passing second. When her friend finally picked up, Claire could barely speak. Her words were sharp, each one cutting through the silence. She demanded answers, but what she received instead were weak excuses and half-truths. Her best friend tried to justify their actions, but it was clear now, nothing would ever be the same. Claire hung up, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on her. The rage inside her was boiling over, but beneath it all, there was a deep, aching sorrow. After the phone call ended, Claire felt numb. The rush of anger had faded, leaving a hollow emptiness in its place. She didn't know what to do next. Her mind kept replaying the conversation, the excuses, the half-hearted apologies. She had hoped for an explanation, a genuine reason for why her best friend and Alex had betrayed her. But all she got was more deceit, more lies to add to the pile. The silence in the room was deafening. Claire paced back and forth, the walls closing in around her. The betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a complete destruction of everything she had built her life around. She felt like she was suffocating, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't stay. The man and the friend she had loved were gone, replaced by strangers who had shattered her world. She had to walk away, but the pain of doing so was almost too much to bear. Claire knew that her confrontation with Alex would be inevitable. He had to face the consequences of his actions. She was no longer afraid of his excuses or his manipulations. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back. When he finally came home, The tension between them was palpable. Claire stood in the middle of the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Alex tried to speak, but Claire cut him off. There was no need for him to explain anymore. She had seen it all, she knew it all, and it no longer mattered. As she spoke, her voice was calm, but filled with a cold finality. There was no more room for deception, no more space for his lies. It was over, and Claire was ready to walk away, to leave behind the man who had broken her trust and her heart. Claire stood there, looking at Alex one last time. Her heart ached, but it was a different kind of ache now. It was the ache of letting go. She had fought for so long, tried to hold on to a relationship that no longer existed. But now she was finally free. The truth had cut deep, but it also gave her clarity. As Alex stood there, silent and regretful, Claire knew that she would never look at him the same way again. The person he had once been, her partner, her confidant, was gone. And so with a heavy heart she made the decision to leave. There was nothing left for her here, nothing to salvage. As she walked toward the door, Claire took one last glance at Alex. She didn't need to say anything more. The silence between them spoke volumes. And as the door clicked shut behind her, Claire felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It was over, but it was only the beginning of her healing. Claire's heart was pounding as she stood at the threshold, her breath shallow. She had spent days trying to push past the hurt, but now, standing before Alex, it all came rushing back. He had finally come to face the music, but Claire wasn't sure she was ready to hear his apology. He stood before her, his face filled with regret and guilt, but it was too little, too late. The man she had loved had disappeared, leaving behind someone she didn't recognize. Every word he spoke, every attempt to explain himself, fell flat. Claire had already made up her mind. She didn't need his excuses anymore. She didn't need the false promises. What was broken couldn't be fixed. Her voice was steady, but the words cut through the silence like a knife. "I'm done," she said, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had taken all she could. The end had come, and she was finally free. Alex's voice faltered as he spoke, trying to make sense of the mess he had created. "I'm sorry, Claire. I never meant to hurt you. I was confused and I made a terrible mistake." His words felt hollow, like an attempt to fill a void that couldn't be mended with apologies. Claire didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of weakness. She had spent too many nights awake, wondering if there was any way to salvage this. But the truth was clear now. There was nothing left to save. She had given him everything, trusted him with her heart, and he had thrown it all away. The words he spoke only deepened the divide between them. Claire felt numb, her anger slowly giving way to something else. An unshakable resolve. She was done being the one to forgive. She had given him every chance, and he had failed her every time. Claire's emotions were a storm inside her, but her voice was calm, clear. "I don't want your apologies. I don't need them anymore." The words hung in the air, final and piercing. Alex's face dropped, the realization hitting him that she was no longer the woman he had known. Claire had moved beyond the anger, beyond the pain. She had come to understand that forgiveness wasn't something she owed him. It was something she owed herself. As much as she had loved him, as much as she had hoped he would change, it was clear now, he never would. The love she had once given so freely was now a distant memory, replaced by the certainty that she was better off without him. She had to let go, for her own sake. There was no turning back. The betrayal had broken them, and there was nothing left but the truth. Alex took a step toward Claire, his voice shaky. "Please, don't leave. We can work through this." But the desperation in his voice only made Claire's resolve stronger. She had been here before, promises of change, of rebuilding, but it was all empty. She had already given him the benefit of the doubt too many times, hoping he would prove her wrong. But now, standing before him, she saw it for what it was: manipulation. Claire knew that no matter how many times he promised to change, it would never be enough. She had to protect herself. This wasn't love, it was a cycle of hurt. "No," Claire said firmly. "I'm not staying. I'm not going to keep pretending everything's okay. It's over, Alex." The words were final, as if the door to their past had been slammed shut with no chance of reopening. As Claire walked away, the finality of it all settled into her bones. The weight of the past few months, the lies, the betrayal, had been lifted, but in its place was an emptiness. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt free. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. Alex had broken her heart, but now, she was reclaiming her life. She didn't know what healing looked like, but she knew she couldn't do it with him by her side. As she closed the door behind her, Claire whispered to herself, "I deserve better." And in that moment, she knew it was true. She didn't need his approval or his validation. She only needed herself. The journey of healing had begun, and it started with walking away. The days following Claire's departure from Alex felt like a blur. She had left behind the life she had once known, but now she faced the daunting task of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. Every corner of her apartment, every familiar place, reminded her of the life she had shared with Alex. Yet, amidst the emptiness, Claire felt a strange sense of calm settling in. The raw pain that had consumed her heart was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. It wasn't that she was over the betrayal. It was just that she was starting to let go. Each day she spent in her own space, on her own terms, gave her the time and space she needed to heal. She wasn't ready to forgive Alex yet, but she was no longer consumed by the need for closure. The healing had begun. She had taken the first step, and she was moving forward. As the days passed, Claire found herself reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people she had lost touch with. She had always put Alex before everything else, but now, she was rediscovering the strength in her own relationships. Her friends were there for her, offering support, encouragement, and love, just when she needed it the most. They didn't judge her for her past decisions. They simply stood by her, offering a sense of normalcy amidst the storm. One evening, Claire met up with an old friend for coffee. They laughed, shared memories, and for the first time in a long while, Claire felt truly alive. The night was filled with laughter and warmth, a reminder that she wasn't alone. There was life after the pain, and she was learning how to embrace it. As Claire continued to heal, she began to take better care of herself. She started running again, something she hadn't done in months. The early morning runs allowed her to clear her mind, to process the anger and pain that still lingered, but also to focus on herself, her body, and her strength. Each mile felt like a release, a step further away from the past. The ache in her chest was still there, but it was no longer the overwhelming force it once had been. Claire could feel herself slowly returning to the person she used to be. She wasn't just a victim of betrayal. She was someone who had endured and survived, someone who could rise above. The road to healing was long, but every small victory, every run, every laugh, every moment of peace was a testament to her strength. The weeks passed, and Claire found herself facing moments of joy again. It wasn't that she had forgotten the pain of her past, but the grief was no longer all-consuming. She had moments of lightness, laughing with friends, enjoying a good book, taking quiet walks in the park. Life was starting to feel like it was worth living again. For the first time, Claire realized that she wasn't defined by her past. She was no longer just someone who had been hurt. She was someone who had survived, who had learned, and who had found a way to move forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had made her stronger. She wasn't completely healed, but she was okay. And sometimes, that was enough. Claire was beginning to realize that life was not about waiting for closure or answers from the people who had hurt her. It was about moving forward, creating new memories, and rediscovering who she was outside of her past. She didn't need Alex or her best friend to validate her worth. She had learned to validate herself. The healing was ongoing, but Claire knew she was capable of more than just surviving. She was capable of thriving. She had walked through fire, and now she was learning to dance in the light. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, Claire was excited about what the future held. She was ready for the next chapter, stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than ever before. Claire had been walking this road for so long, one foot in front of the other, unsure of where it would lead. But now, standing at the edge of a new beginning, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't easy to get here, but after months of pain and healing, she had come to realize something profound. The past no longer defined her. The wounds had scarred, but they no longer controlled her. She had found her strength, her voice. And it wasn't just about moving on from Alex or the betrayal anymore. It was about moving forward in her life, finding new joys, new relationships, and a deeper connection to herself. Claire knew there was still days ahead where the weight of the past would pull at her, but she was no longer afraid of it. She was ready to embrace the future. She was ready to live again. Claire had never realized how much she had been holding on to until she finally let go. The memories of Alex, the pain of his betrayal, and the weight of what was lost had all kept her in a place of constant turmoil. But now, as she stood on her own, without the emotional baggage of the past weighing her down, she felt lighter. There were still days when the thought of what she had gone through made her ache, but it no longer consumed her. Claire had become her own source of strength. She no longer sought validation or approval from anyone else. She had found it within herself. She had learned that the true power was in her ability to choose her path, to decide what she wanted for her future, and to walk forward with confidence, no matter how uncertain the road ahead might be. One of the most important lessons Claire had learned was that closure didn't come from another person's apology. It came from within. She had spent so much time waiting for Alex to apologize, for him to give her the answers she thought she needed. But she had come to realize that she didn't need his apology to move forward. What mattered most was her own forgiveness. She had forgiven herself for staying too long, for trusting too blindly, and for not listening to her instincts. It wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about accepting that the past was behind her, and she had the power to choose a new path. Claire was no longer burdened by the need for closure from someone else. She had found it in herself, in her own heart, and that was enough. Claire had come to understand that life wasn't about avoiding the painful moments, but about embracing them as part of her journey. She had suffered, yes, but she had also grown. And now, as she looked back, she saw how far she had come. The road to healing wasn't a straight line, and there were times when she felt like giving up, when the pain seemed too much to bear. But through it all, she had kept moving forward, one step at a time. She had rebuilt herself from the inside out, and now she was stronger than she had ever been. There were still scars, but they no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, but they didn't control her. Claire was free, free from the past, free from the pain, and free to embrace a future full of new possibilities. Claire had once thought that love was something that completed her, that it was the missing piece of the puzzle. But now, she understood that love, true love, began with herself. She had spent so much time waiting for someone else to validate her worth, but she now knew that her worth was never in anyone else's hands. It had always been within her. And as she stood there, looking out at the world, Claire felt a quiet sense of pride in herself. She had come through the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and more complete than she had ever been before. The love she had been searching for had been there all along, within her. She wasn't waiting for someone else to make her whole anymore. She was whole on her own. And that, Claire realized, was the greatest gift of all.